They were meant to unite kingdoms, to seal peace with the touch of a jeweled hand, and to ensure the survival of dynasties through the birth of future rulers. Yet too often royal marriages became death sentences. Beneath the gold-stitched gowns and velvet canopies, betrayal whispered. Behind every ceremonial vow, there lurked an undercurrent of ambition, greed, and revenge. History remembers many royal unions not for their grandeur, but for how they ended in blood. In the early hours of October 14th, 1587, the silence of the royal palace in Copenhagen was broken by the dull clang of chains. Queen Sophie of Mecklenburg-Güstrow lay awake in her bed, the distant echoes of footsteps growing louder. She would later describe the sensation not as fear, but inevitability. That day, her daughter-in-law, the young and tormented Princess Elizabeth of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, would be found dead, poisoned. The royal physician would whisper. The culprit, her own husband. This was not an isolated case. Through centuries, dynasties across Europe saw marriages forged by diplomacy and shattered by ambition, wives murdered in silence, husbands sent to the scaffold, lovers caught in the storm of political deceit. Their stories, carved into history through dusty chronicles and fading letters, speak not just of romance turned rotten, but of thrones paid for in blood. In this documentary, we unearth the darkest corners of regal unions, where betrayal walked hand in hand with vows, and where love was not a sanctuary but a battlefield. It begins with one of the most infamous blood-stained royal marriages of the early modern world. In 1572, Paris was gripped in tension. The French wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants had already ravaged the realm. It was into this powder keg that King Charles IX, under the influence of his formidable mother Catherine de' Medici, arranged the marriage of his sister, Marguerite de Valois, to the Protestant Prince Henry of Navarre. To the outside world, this union seemed a miracle of peace. A Catholic princess and a Huguenot prince. But in the shadowed chambers of the Louvre, something far more sinister brewed. Marguerite, later known as Queen Margot, was a woman of elegance, wit, and quiet strength. Yet she was never meant to have agency in her own life. Her marriage was purely political, a trap disguised in lace. On the night of the wedding, celebrations echoed through the stone streets of Paris. Wine flowed. Music rang through the palace halls. But only days later, the Seine would run red with blood. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre erupted on August 24th, 1572. Thousands of Protestants who had gathered in Paris for the wedding were slaughtered in their beds, in the streets, in the churches. Among them were close allies of Henry. Though he survived narrowly, the message was clear. The marriage had never been about unity. It had been about bait. Marguerite herself would be locked inside the Louvre, watched day and night. Her husband, forced to convert to Catholicism or die, bowed temporarily to the pressure, later escaping the court disguised as a servant. The massacre destroyed any pretense of harmony, and with it, the marriage itself. Though they remained husband and wife in name for over 2 decades, they lived apart, entwined by law, divided by purpose. Marguerite, imprisoned and disgraced, later wrote her memoirs, revealing the cruelty she endured, the manipulation of her mother, and the emptiness of her gilded cage. But it was another marriage, one forged in an even colder fire, that ended not just in betrayal, but in royal execution. In 1540, the English court stood at the zenith of power and paranoia. Henry VIII, the tempestuous Tudor king, had already left behind 2 wives, one divorced, one beheaded. The failure to produce a male heir haunted him, drove him, devoured him. After the death of Jane Seymour, who had finally given him the long-awaited son, Henry sought a new wife for diplomatic alliance. Enter Anne of Cleves, a German duchess, quiet, modest, and, according to the painter Hans Holbein, a vision of nobility. But the marriage was doomed before it began. When Henry met Anne in person, his disappointment was volcanic. "I like her not," he reportedly told his advisers. The king claimed she smelled, that her figure displeased him, that she lacked the spark he desired. He could not consummate the marriage. Within 6 months, it was annulled, and shrewdly accepted the terms and lived out her days in relative peace, styled as the king's sister. But Henry's next choice would not be so lucky. Only weeks after discarding Anne, the king married Catherine Howard, a teenager of beauty and charm, and cousin to his second beheaded wife, Anne Boleyn. Catherine was vivacious, ill-prepared for the monstrous machinery of court politics, and already compromised. Unbeknownst to Henry, she had a past filled with indiscretions, romantic liaisons, whispered promises, letters exchanged in secret. When rumors reached the court that the queen was unfaithful, the reaction was swift and brutal. Catherine was arrested, interrogated, and betrayed by her own ladies-in-waiting. Her former lovers were executed, and in February 1542, barely 2 years after her wedding, she was taken to the Tower of London. Historical records note that she asked for the execution block the night before, practicing how to lay her head upon it. The next morning, clad in black velvet, she walked calmly to her death. She was only about 20 years old. The message was clear. A queen who betrayed the king, whether in flesh or in favor, would pay with her life. The Tudor court was not unique in this regard. Across the Channel, in the opulent palaces of the Habsburgs and the Spanish Empire, similar fates unfolded. Political marriages were not simply contracts. They were gambits, and the cost of failure was often fatal. In 1554, Mary I of England, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, entered into marriage with Philip II of Spain. A staunch Catholic, Mary sought to restore the old religion to England. Her marriage to Philip was a diplomatic bond designed to anchor that mission. But Philip cared little for her. He spent most of his time abroad. The English people resented him. Their marriage produced no heir. Mary, increasingly isolated and desperate, launched a series of persecutions against Protestants, earning her the enduring name Bloody Mary. As her health declined, Philip withdrew further. He did not even return when she died in 1558. Though no blood was spilled between them directly, the marriage itself triggered a wave of executions, political backlash, and national unrest. Thousands were burned at the stake during her reign. The English court, once wary of religious strife, had now become a battlefield of ideology, fueled by a loveless royal union. Meanwhile, in the Russian Empire, a young noble woman would rise to power through marriage, only to orchestrate her husband's murder and take the throne. Catherine II of Russia, later known as Catherine the Great, was born Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German state. At just 14, she was married to the future Emperor Peter III, a man she despised. He was immature, cruel, and fascinated more with military toys and statecraft. Their marriage was cold, devoid of affection. Catherine, ever astute, began building alliances within the court. When Peter ascended the throne in 1762, his erratic behavior and unpopularity made him vulnerable. Catherine acted swiftly. Within 6 months, she staged a coup with the help of her lover, Grigory Orlov, and sympathetic military officers. Peter was arrested and forced to abdicate. Days later, he was dead, killed in mysterious circumstances at the hands of Catherine's allies. Officially, it was said he died of hemorrhoidal colic, but few believed it. The Empress did not order the death directly, at least not on paper, but she did not punish those who did. Her reign would become one of the most celebrated in Russian history. But the blood of her husband stained the foundation of her power. This pattern, the marriage of inconvenience, followed by the purge of partner, was not reserved only for empires. In smaller courts, where dynasties were more fragile and ambitions more desperate, the consequences of betrayal were swift and merciless. In the Kingdom of Portugal, Queen Maria I, remembered for her descent into madness, was once the product of a politically strategic marriage that unraveled into tragedy. She wed her uncle, Infante Pedro, a union considered necessary to maintain dynastic purity. Their relationship was said to be affectionate, even loving. But when Pedro died in 1786, Maria's world collapsed. Overcome by grief and political pressure, she began exhibiting signs of mental illness. By 1792, she was declared insane and removed from power. Her marriage had begun with hope, but ended in psychological ruin. While no blood was directly spilled, the cost was the Queen's mind, shattered by the weight of royal obligation and personal loss. Again and again, history bears witness to a cruel irony that those chosen for the crown and share the throne were often pawns used, discarded, or destroyed in the service of greater political gains. Royal marriage was never truly about love. It was about strategy, about alliance, about control. But sometimes the chess pieces push back.